In the early days of personal computing, software was not just a tool, it was power, control, and influence. The companies that controlled the operating systems effectively controlled the entire ecosystem of computers. Among those companies, one name stood above all others: Microsoft. For decades, Microsoft dominated the computing world with its Windows operating system. From offices to homes, from schools to businesses, Windows became the standard platform that millions relied on every day. During this era, another operating system existed quietly in the background, developed by a community rather than a corporation. That system was Linux. At first, Linux looked insignificant compared to Microsoft's empire. It had no massive marketing campaigns, no giant corporate funding, and no commercial dominance. It was simply a free open-source project created by a young Finnish student named Linus Torvalds in 1991. But over the decades, something extraordinary happened. Linux grew, not just slowly, but steadily and relentlessly, eventually becoming one of the most powerful technological forces in the world. Today, Linux powers the majority of the internet. Most cloud servers, supercomputers, and even the Android phones used by billions of people. And the most surprising part is that Microsoft, once one of Linux's biggest critics, can no longer stop it. Back in the 1990s and early 2000s, Microsoft saw Linux as a threat. At that time, Microsoft's business model depended heavily on selling proprietary software. Windows and other Microsoft products were closed systems, meaning their source code was hidden and controlled strictly by the company. Linux represented the exact opposite philosophy. It was open source, meaning anyone could view, modify, and distribute the code freely. This idea was revolutionary, and to companies like Microsoft, it was dangerous. If people could get powerful software for free, why would they continue paying for proprietary systems? Internally, Microsoft executives were deeply concerned about Linux's potential. One infamous internal document from Microsoft described Linux as a direct competitor that threatened Microsoft's business model. At one point, even Microsoft's leadership publicly criticized Linux and the open source movement, suggesting it could undermine the commercial software industry. The company attempted various strategies to maintain its dominance, including strengthening Windows' ecosystem, expanding partnerships with hardware manufacturers, and promoting proprietary software standards. Despite Microsoft's power, Linux continued to grow quietly. Unlike traditional software companies, Linux was not built by a single organization. Instead, it was developed collaboratively by thousands of programmers around the world. This decentralized development model meant that no single company could control or shut down Linux. Developers, universities, hobbyists, and companies all contributed improvements, bug fixes, and new features. Over time, Linux distributions such as Ubuntu, Debian, Red Hat, and others emerged, making the operating system easier for users and businesses to adopt. These distributions packaged the Linux kernel with user-friendly interfaces, software tools, and support systems, making it more accessible to everyday users. One of the key reasons Linux became unstoppable was the rise of the Internet. As the Internet expanded rapidly in the late 1990s and early 2000s, companies needed reliable, secure, and cost-effective server operating systems. Linux turned out to be perfect for this role. Because it was open source, companies could customize it to fit their specific needs. It was also known for its stability and security, two crucial factors for running web servers and infrastructure. As a result, many internet companies began using Linux to power their systems. Gradually, Linux became the backbone of the web. Major websites, online services, and data centers started relying heavily on Linux servers. Another major turning point came with the rise of cloud computing. Companies like Amazon, Google, and later many others built massive cloud platforms that allowed businesses to run applications on remote servers instead of their own hardware. Most of these cloud systems were built on Linux. Its flexibility and open nature made it ideal for large-scale infrastructure. When businesses deployed their applications to the cloud, they often ended up running Linux whether they realized it or not. In this way, Linux spread even further across the digital world. It became invisible yet essential, quietly powering the infrastructure behind countless modern services. Meanwhile, Linux also conquered another massive market: mobile devices. When Google developed the Android operating system, it chose Linux as its foundation. This decision meant that every Android smartphone essentially ran a version of Linux under the hood. Today, Android is the most widely used mobile operating system on the planet, With billions of active devices, this alone gave Linux an enormous global presence. Even people who had never heard the name Linux were using it daily through their phones. Supercomputers were another area where Linux dominated. The world's most powerful supercomputers rely almost entirely on Linux-based systems. The reason is simple. Supercomputers require extreme levels of customization, performance optimization, and reliability. Linux's open architecture allows engineers to modify the system to achieve maximum performance. Because of this, Linux became the preferred platform for scientific research, weather modeling, artificial intelligence, and advanced simulations. All of these developments happened while Microsoft was still focused primarily on the desktop market. Windows remained dominant on personal computers, but the world of computing was changing rapidly. The future of technology was shifting toward cloud services, mobile platforms, and large-scale infrastructure areas, where Linux already had a strong foothold. Microsoft eventually realized that the battle it once thought it could win had fundamentally changed. The turning point came when Microsoft began transforming itself from a traditional software company into a cloud and services company. When Satya Nadella became CEO of Microsoft in 2014, the company adopted a new strategy. Instead of fighting Linux, Microsoft started embracing it. This shift surprised many people who remembered Microsoft's earlier hostility toward open source. But the reason for the change was practical. Microsoft's cloud platform, Azure, needed to support the operating systems that customers were actually using, and many of those customers were using Linux. As a result, Microsoft started integrating Linux support into Azure in a big way. Today, a large portion of Azure's virtual machines run Linux rather than Windows. Microsoft even began contributing code to the Linux kernel itself, becoming one of the largest corporate contributors to open-source projects. In another surprising move, Microsoft released its own Linux distribution for internal use within its cloud infrastructure. Microsoft also began open-sourcing many of its own technologies. Projects like .NET, Visual Studio Code, and various developer tools were made open source. This strategy allowed Microsoft to remain relevant in a world where developers increasingly preferred open ecosystems over closed platforms. Rather than trying to defeat Linux, Microsoft decided to work alongside it. One symbolic moment that demonstrated this shift was the creation of the Windows subsystem for Linux, often abbreviated as WSL. This feature allowed developers to run a full Linux environment directly inside Windows. Instead of forcing developers to choose between Windows and Linux, Microsoft enabled them to use both together seamlessly. This was something unimaginable during the earlier era of competition. The rise of open-source culture played a major role in this transformation. Over time, open source proved that collaborative development could produce powerful and reliable software. Many of the tools that developers rely on today are open source, from programming languages to databases to web frameworks. Companies realized that open collaboration often leads to faster innovation and stronger ecosystems. Linux became the most visible symbol of this open source movement. Its success demonstrated that a community-driven project could compete with and even surpass corporate software products. Instead of a single company controlling the direction of development, thousands of contributors around the world could shape the future of the technology together. Another reason Microsoft can't stop Linux anymore is that Linux is no longer a single product. It is an entire ecosystem. It exists in countless forms, from servers and cloud systems to smartphones, routers, embedded devices, and even smart appliances. Many modern technologies depend on Linux in ways that are invisible to users. Because it is so deeply embedded across the technology landscape, eliminating or replacing Linux would be nearly impossible. Even Microsoft itself now depends on Linux in several areas. The company uses Linux internally for certain services and cloud operations. Microsoft developers contribute to open-source communities, collaborate with Linux developers, and build tools that support Linux environments. In many ways, Microsoft has become part of the ecosystem it once viewed as a rival. The story of Microsoft and Linux represents a broader shift in the technology industry. In the past, companies often competed by locking users into proprietary platforms. Today, the industry increasingly values interoperability, open standards, and collaborative development. Open-source software has become a foundation for innovation across the entire tech sector. Linux also continues to evolve. The kernel is constantly updated with improvements in performance, security, and hardware support. New distributions continue to emerge, targeting different use cases and audiences. Some are designed for beginners, others for developers, and others for enterprise environments. Meanwhile, the influence of Linux extends into new technological frontiers, such as artificial intelligence, edge computing, and containerization. Technologies like containers and orchestration platforms rely heavily on Linux features to function efficiently. These tools allow developers to build and deploy applications more quickly and reliably, which has become essential in modern software development. Ultimately, the reason Microsoft cannot stop Linux anymore is simple. Linux is not controlled by a single company, and it is not limited to a single market. It is a global collaborative project that has become deeply integrated into the infrastructure of modern computing. Its open nature allows it to adapt and evolve continuously, while its massive community ensures that development never stops. Instead of fighting this reality, Microsoft has chosen to adapt. By embracing open source and supporting Linux, Microsoft has ensured that it remains relevant in a technology landscape that has changed dramatically since the early days of personal computing. The rise of Linux is not just the story of an operating system. It is the story of how collaboration, openness, and shared innovation can reshape entire industries. What began as a small project created by a student has grown into one of the most influential technologies in the world. And in that sense, Linux did something remarkable. It didn't defeat Microsoft through direct competition. Instead, it changed the rules of the game entirely.